So welcome back, guys. We are going to be looking at connecting up to some SQL database with our large language model. And so I'll just run through this notebook here. I'm not running it live. I've got everything printed out onto the screen in Colab here. And the thing I'll say about this from the very start is that LangChain and Llama Index, here when we're dealing with RAG, large language models, everything is developing so fast, and we're constantly updating the way things are done and what functionality is available in LangChain. I can tell you it's fairly straightforward to connect up to an SQL database, and we'll see how to do that in this notebook. The optimization of it, I don't think it's quite perfected at this stage. So if you've got a real use case for this, you might have a little bit of bother trying to work around the optimization of this system. But this notebook, we're just going to go through the basics of connecting up to the SQL database, and we're going to see that in action. We can quite easily get the large language model to communicate with the database, get results out of that, and provide answers for an initial query. So this notebook's available in the GitHub repo, in the comments below. You can access that, and we're importing a load of stuff from LangChain, including this SQL database, which is the LangChain wrapper around some SQL database. And so if we move a little bit further on here, just for this example here, I'm pulling the Titanic data set as the famous data, the Kaggle challenge of predicting who survives on the Titanic. But I've just pulled that data set just to give us some data to work on. Here it is in a data frame, and I'm just going to turn that into an SQLite database. And once we've got that SQLite database, we can see, we've got a database. We can query it, cursor.execute select star from database table. So we've now got a database. Now we need to turn it into a LangChain database, which means we need to get the LangChain wrapper of a database so it functions with the rest of LangChain. So here we need to give the URI of our database, and you look in the documents, there are many methods of connecting up to databases. You're going to be able to connect up to whatever database you're using, or Postgre or whatever. So here we connect up to our database. This is where we're going to have to specify exactly the connection string to our database with all our passwords, etc. But here we're just using SQLite, so we're not messing around with all of that. And we've got this LangChain object now, which is a wrapper around a database. We can communicate with the database. And this method in LangChain, get table info, that lets us see the tables in our database. And so we've got all of that. So now let's get a large language model here from OpenAI. And this is an agentic workflow, like we were working with agents last time. This is not some linear workflow where we've got question, goes through, large language model, get some response. Now we've got some sort of agentic workflow where we've got some question and we say, hey, large language model, we've got a question here. Don't forget you've got these tools available. And the large language model says, oh, yeah, I maybe answer that question. Oh, no, actually, I've got this database I can look in. And so we have to create these tools for it. It's going to look in to that database. It's going to say, okay, now I need to write an SQL query. Okay, that SQL query didn't work. Okay, I'm going to write another one. Okay, I've got some sort of result back. Okay, that doesn't answer the question. I'm going to write another query, etc., etc. So we're no longer in this linear workflow. We're now in this sort of agentic workflow where the large language model is going to decide what action it takes. So, like last time, we need to specify some sort of toolkit. This toolkit in this particular case is going to take in the database and a large language model, and then we need to specify this agent executor, and this is the object that we can actually invoke, that we can actually run. We give it the toolkit, a large language model, and this is crucial, the agent type. This is going to define basically the rules of this workflow, of how this large language model needs or is supposed to interact with the tool. So you can check out the different types of agent types in the LangChain documents. And once we have this agent, all we need to do is invoke, as we do with every LangChain runnable. We need to invoke it, give it a question, and then it's launched into this workflow, which has been defined. And even though the code that we're using is very simple, we get this whole complex workflow going on behind the scenes. So in this particular instance, we're just saying, well, what columns are in this table? We get all of these columns. It can analyze the table, get information about the table, and finally provide us, yeah, these are the columns in this table. That's fine, but how about we test it on some sort of query? But before that, let's just have a quick look at this workflow, which is defined by the prompt. And this is what it looks like. It says answer the following questions as best you can. You have access to the following tools, and we get this is what I was talking about before, this whole agentic workflow. Okay, we get the question, and then it should think about what it should do, and then it should decide on an action to take with the appropriate tool name. That tool gets called with the input from the large language model, and gets some sort of result back, and then this process gets repeated n times. Then when it's happy, I now know the final answer, and it provides the final answer. And so then we provide the input question and this agent scratchpad, which is where everything else, every other result previously gets stored. And so it has access to see everything that's happened so far, what the initial question was, and then it just goes, okay, well, which tool shall I use? And so that's the way it works. Let's invoke it then with some actual question. Was there anybody from the Futrell family on board the Titanic? And let's look at this workflow now. It's going to be very interesting. And because we specified verbose, we can see what this workflow is. It says I need to check the database where any passengers from the Futrell family. And so then, as a result of that, it writes this query, select star from passengers, where last name is equal to Futrell. And what happens when it does this is we get an SQL error. And the reason we get an SQL error is because it's just decided that it's got some sort of passengers table, and the table name in the database is not passengers. So it didn't work. So it catches this error and says, okay, well, I should check the schema of the Titanic table to see the table names. And so it does that. And once it's done that, it says, well, I can't see any passengers table, but there is a Titanic table that contains passenger information, so I should query that. It writes the query, select star from Titanic table, where name like Futrell. And this time it's not doing a direct search. It's decided, okay, I'm going to do a fuzzy search. So that's maybe just on the basis it's realized there's got a name category, but there's no first name and last name. So maybe he's not going to get an exact match. So he needs to use a fuzzy match. So that's what he decides to do. So this is great because we've trapped, maybe if you like, the intelligence and the logic of the large language model into this very specific workflow. And so it gets a result back. And as the basis of that, was there anybody? Yes, there were passengers from the Futrell Ford on board the Titanic. So that is essentially the workflow. How we can link up the large language model with the SQL database. And like I say, it can get complicated when we start trying to optimize these systems. But just to link up to the database and get the basics done, it's as simple as that. So I'll see you guys in the next video.